There is a silent question that many women over 50 carry without the courage to say out loud. Not to their doctor, not to their partner, not to their friends, sometimes not even to themselves, because formulating this question in words means confronting it in a way that, as long as it remains unspoken, can still be kept at a distance. Is this just menopause? Or is something more serious happening to my mind? That question carries a specific weight that is difficult to describe for those who haven't lived it. It isn't just clinical curiosity. It isn't just the search for an explanation for uncomfortable symptoms. It's the fear of a trajectory. The fear that what's happening now might be the beginning of something that has no return. Something she saw happen to someone she loved. Something she always imagined would never happen to her. Something that now seems to be becoming a possibility she can no longer ignore. It all begins discreetly. You walk into a room and completely forget why. Not occasionally, not as an exception, but with a frequency that has started to feel like a pattern. You lose simple words mid-conversation. Not technical terms, not rare vocabulary, but common words you've used thousands of times that suddenly simply don't appear. You struggle to concentrate on tasks that used to be automatic. You read the same sentence twice without absorbing what it says. And then the fear comes. The kind of fear that a good night's sleep doesn't treat. Because when the mind changes, when the instrument that was always most reliable starts showing signs that something is different, insecurity arrives almost immediately. And it brings with it a specific form of suffering unique to this experience. The suffering of not knowing the difference between what is normal and what is dangerous, between what will pass and what will progress, between what can be supported and what cannot be reversed. To answer this question with the clarity it deserves, it's necessary to first understand what menopause actually does to the brain. And the answer goes far beyond what most doctors explain in a routine appointment. Menopause isn't just a hormonal transition that affects the menstrual cycle and produces hot flashes. It is a deep systemic reorganization that affects virtually every system in the body, including, in a very direct way, brain function. Estrogen, the hormone whose levels fall progressively and then abruptly during menopause, isn't just a reproductive hormone. It is a powerful neuromodulator with extensive, well-documented effects on the central nervous system. Estrogen facilitates synaptic transmission in brain regions associated with memory and learning. It regulates the production and metabolism of neurotransmitters, including serotonin, dopamine, and acetylcholine. It exerts protective effects on neurons through antioxidant and anti-inflammatory properties. It influences the volume and function of the hippocampus, the most critical region for forming new memories. When estrogen levels fall, especially during the perimenopausal transition, when that fall can be rapid and irregular, the female brain needs to adapt to a neurochemical environment fundamentally different from what it operated in for decades. And that adaptation isn't instantaneous, isn't painless, and for many women, isn't silent. Menopausal brain fog, that specific feeling of mental cloudiness, of thoughts arriving more slowly, of difficulty accessing memories that used to be instant, is a real, physiologically grounded experience that affects a significant percentage of women during the menopausal transition. It isn't weakness, it isn't imagination, it isn't psychological in the sense of not real. It is neurobiology, but, and here is the point that most women never hear stated clearly enough, menopausal brain fog has specific characteristics that distinguish it from the early signs of pathological cognitive decline. And knowing that difference is what transforms paralyzing fear
into intelligent action. It was exactly from the understanding of these differences that specialists developed practical tools to help women distinguish what is normal adaptation from what warrants medical attention. You'll find it at the first link in the description. Today, I'm going to show you the 5 signs that women over 50 need to know, not to cause panic, but to navigate this phase with the information they deserve to have. The first sign is mental confusion in simple tasks, forgetting why you walked into a room, losing objects frequently, not as an exception but as a repeated pattern, taking longer to organize thoughts in situations that used to be simple, feeling the mind freezing up during everyday tasks. During menopause, this is typically linked to the combination of hormonal fluctuations, sleep deprivation, and increased stress. Factors that compromise working memory and executive attention in measurable but frequently reversible ways. The important distinction: in normal menopausal adaptation, these lapses tend to be inconsistent. There are better days and worse days. The ability to remember with more context or with an additional prompt is generally preserved. Daily functioning, while affected, remains manageable. When the lapses become progressive, when there is a clear line of worsening over months, when functioning in activities that used to be simple becomes increasingly compromised regardless of daily conditions, that warrants evaluation. The difference isn't the presence of the symptom, it's the pattern over time. The second sign is intense emotional changes. Anxiety greater than you recognize in yourself.
Irritability that seems to come from nowhere with an intensity disproportionate to the situation. Frequent sadness without a clearly identifiable cause. A feeling of mental overwhelm that doesn't ease with rest. Many women describe this period with a phrase that resonates with a painful precision. I don't recognize myself anymore. And this happens because estrogen directly regulates the neurotransmitter systems linked to mood: serotonin,
Dopamine, norepinephrine. When its levels fluctuate irregularly and then fall, the neurochemical balance that sustained the habitual emotional state is disrupted. It's real. It's physiological. And it's far more common than conversations about menopause suggest. The important distinction: emotional changes related to menopause tend to be fluctuating, correlated with the sleep cycle, stress levels, and the hormonal cycles that still exist during perimenopause. They have a reactive quality. When emotional changes are persistent, progressive, and accompanied by personality changes that the people closest to her also notice. When there is apathy that doesn't respond to stimuli that previously brought pleasure. When there is disorientation or confusion that goes beyond what's expected, that warrants specific clinical attention. The third sign is persistent difficulty concentrating, starting tasks and not finishing them, needing to reread the same paragraph several times, losing the thread of a conversation that's happening, having difficulty following reasoning that used to be easy to track. During the menopausal transition, sleep quality is frequently compromised in ways that have direct and measurable impact on attentional capacity. Night sweats, one of the most common perimenopausal symptoms, interrupt sleep at moments that specifically compromise the memory consolidation and cognitive recovery phases. The result is an executive attention deficit that isn't different in its mechanisms from what anyone would experience after consecutive nights of fragmented sleep. The important distinction: when sleep quality improves, through specific treatments, habit changes, or simply with natural progression through the transition, concentration difficulty typically improves alongside it. When concentration difficulty progresses independently of sleep improvement, when there is disorientation in familiar environments, when there is growing difficulty with tasks that were previously automated, that goes beyond menopausal adaptation and warrants investigation, The fourth sign is forgetting that generates constant fear. This is the sign that weighs most emotionally, and the one that most frequently leads women into the anxiety spiral that worsens exactly what they're trying to monitor. The lapses stop seeming like mere inconveniences and start generating a daily anxiety that has a life of its own. The woman begins monitoring every thought, every word that takes too long to arrive, every moment when the mind seems less agile than she'd expect. Am I getting worse? Could this be Alzheimer's? Is something serious beginning? And that constant state of cognitive hypervigilance has a real neurobiological cost. Chronic anxiety elevates cortisol. Chronically elevated cortisol actively compromises hippocampal function, inhibits the formation of new memories, reduces processing speed, compromises access to existing memories. In other words, the fear of forgetting can by itself worsen the forgetting. This cycle is cruel, it is silent, and it is extraordinarily common in women at this stage. The important distinction: forgetting that arises from increased anxiety has a different quality. It tends to be worse in stressful or high-pressure situations. It tends to improve when the woman is relaxed, rested, and in a low-stress environment. Anxiety, not memory itself, is the primary modulator. When forgetting is progressive and doesn't respond to stress relief, when there is confusion about recent events that others clearly remember, when there is repetition of questions without awareness of having already asked them, when there is growing difficulty with routines that used to be automatic, that warrants specific evaluation. If you want to understand clearly how to navigate this distinction and what to do with this information, what specialists have documented about this process is available at the first link in the description. As simple as it always should have been. The fifth sign is the change in personal confidence. This is perhaps the deepest and least discussed impact of all, and the one that most directly affects quality of life and daily experience. When the mind feels unstable, many women begin to withdraw in ways that are so gradual and so logical that they don't realize how much the world around them has narrowed. Avoiding group conversations because the risk of losing the thread in the middle, of forgetting something she should remember, of appearing confused in front of people who always knew her as someone with a sharp mind, is perceived as too real. Declining invitations to situations that used to be enjoyable, speaking less in professional environments, hesitating before offering opinions on topics where there used to be confidence and fluency. The problem stops being just cognitive. It starts affecting self-esteem, identity, and emotional security in ways that are hard to separate from who this woman always was and who she wants to continue being. This contraction of the world, this gradual shrinking of the space the woman occupies in her own life, is one of the most serious and least named consequences of menopausal brain fog when it isn't adequately addressed. And it is completely unnecessary when the right information and the right support arrive. But there is good news that many women need to hear. Not as empty consolation, but as science-documented reality. The female brain has enormous capacity for adaptation, even during and after menopause. Neuroplasticity, that capacity of the adult brain to create new connections, reorganize neural roots, and strengthen circuits that were being underused, has no expiration date. And in the specific context of the menopausal transition, there is a phenomenon researchers call adaptive reorganization, a process through which the female brain finds new ways to perform the functions that previously depended on the estrogenic support that is now reduced. This process isn't automatic. It doesn't happen independently of the conditions you create for it, but it is real, documented, and can be actively supported. Quality sleep. That allows memory consolidation and glymphatic cleaning to happen completely. And that is especially critical during menopause when sleep is more frequently compromised. Hormonal balance, with adequate medical evaluation to determine if there is indication for specific support. Nutrition focused on neuroprotective compounds that support brain function independent of hormonal levels.
Regular physical activity, especially aerobic exercise that stimulates BDNF production and improves cerebral circulation. Genuine cognitive stimulation that keeps the brain in the state of plasticity that protects it. And perhaps more important than any specific intervention, clear understanding of what is happening. Because when a woman understands that the brain fog she is experiencing has a concrete physiological cause, is not a sign of weakness or failure, and can be actively addressed, the anxiety that was amplifying the symptoms begins to dissipate. And with less anxiety, less cortisol. And with less cortisol, better hippocampal function. And with better hippocampal function, better memory and focus. The cycle can be reversed because the mind doesn't have to be abandoned to fear. It can be supported, protected, strengthened. And the woman living through this transition now, with all its challenges, all its uncertainties, all the moments when she silently asked herself whether what she's feeling is the beginning of something she doesn't want to face. That woman deserves more than anxiety and ignorance. She deserves clear information. She deserves to understand what is happening to her brain and what she can do about it. And she deserves to know that the question she carried in silence, is this just menopause or something more serious, has an answer that can be found, navigated, and responded to with intelligence. The complete method is in the pinned comment. And if this content made sense to you, subscribe to the channel. In the upcoming videos, I'll keep showing you natural, evidence-based strategies to protect memory, recover focus, and navigate this phase of life with more balance, confidence, and hope.